For me, I want to talk about Black Power to Black Panther. And meaning, I want to talk about the historical context for the coming of age of this superhero. It's a superhero that Marvel Comics brings to the forum, and it's the first black superhero that they have. And it comes out in July 1966, so I want you to keep that date in mind, July 1966. But what is interesting is that at the same time that this comes out in the 60s, we have the beginning, the cusp of the Black Power movement. Black Power comes into its formal stage, if you like, I would argue, during the 60s, specifically in June 1966, with the March Against Fear, featuring Martin Luther King, Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael, Willie Ricks, and it was Willie Ricks and Kwame Ture, I must point out, who gave the call for Black Power. Martin Luther King wasn't so enthusiastic about that call, but more about that later. Now, I'm starting off with this slide because it shows the Black Panther emblem against a rooster. And very importantly, Kwame Ture, I'm going to say a little bit more about it later, but he was instrumental in the coming of age of this Black Panther Party, because before the Black Panther Party we know, with Bobby Seale, Huey P. Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen Cleaver, there was a Black Panther Party in Lyons County in Alabama, 1965. And this came about with SNCC, the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, was a part. And he, along with others of SNCC, they joined people in Lyons County in Alabama, which was a majority black population. But what was happening at that time is they wanted to vote in black officials, like a black sheriff, a black, clerk, and so forth. But this had proved problematic in the past because of the Voting Rights issue. But what happened in 1965 is you have the Voting Rights Act. It was one of the Civil Rights Act that got voted in, thanks to the Civil Rights Movement. And that allowed black people in the South more advocacy in terms of voting, because before they had literacy clauses and they had all kinds of clauses, that prevented blacks from voting. So that even though you had majority black populations, they couldn't vote in black officials, they didn't have a vote, they didn't have a say. Jim Crowism was alive and well, as we know, certainly in the South of the US. But what was interesting, and I don't know if you can see the text underneath, was that the rooster represented the Alabama Democratic Party. And I just want to say the Democratic Party at that time, believe it or not, was more right-wing than was the Republican Party. Can you believe it or not? Certainly in the South. And it was evidently very racist because along with the emblem, which signified the Democratic Party, Lyons County, what they had was white supremacy for the right. So that was the motive for the Democratic Party. Now, of course, most of the black folk in Lyons County didn't want to vote for that party. So what SNCC said and Stokely Carmichael is, let's form our own party. And they came up with the Black Panther political party. So this was a political party to challenge the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as well. Their thing was black people need to have their own party and their own symbolism and their own representation. So they came up with the Black Panther logo because for them it represented strength, it represented resilience, it was a powerful symbol for them. So it captured the imagination of them in Lyons County, and also would go on to capture the imagination of Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, who the following year in '66 founded the Black Panther Party in 1966. And they do give homage to Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, for being instrumental in coming up with that symbol. And in fact, they invite him to be one of the leaders of the party, and he is becomes a leader, well, not a leader, but a key part of the Black Panther Party up until '68. There's ideological differences, and Kwame Ture decides to leave the Black Panther Party because he felt it was losing its direction. But Kwame Ture, can we go to the next slide? Kwame Ture was an advocate, although he starts off in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he was a very fervent activist, who you say were on the radical side of the civil rights movement. We go to the next slide. He starts off in alignment with Martin Luther King, who we know has a non-violent, sort of what people call a more conservative approach to the civil rights struggle. And that's Kwame Ture in the middle, and obviously Martin Luther King is on your left-hand side. But to Kwame Ture's left is Willie Ricks. And Willie Ricks, very importantly, he also, along with Kwame Ture, both of them coined the term Black Power. And they coined it in this march. This is a photograph of all three of them heading up the march called the March Against Fear. It was a march from Memphis, Tennessee, all the way to Jackson, Mississippi. And these marches were very important, they were very symbolic, because they garnered attention, the world's attention, to the plight of black people in America. I mean, we've seen, hopefully you've seen the video footage of the police dogs and the abuse that these marchers went with. And it was a mixed crowd. You had whites, you had Latinos, anyone who was concerned about the lack of equality that existed in the US at the time. But very importantly, it was non-violent. So the whole thing what Martin Luther King was saying was, if the police beat you with baton sticks, if you get bitten up by dogs, you take that, you're thrown in jail. Don't throw a punch, don't throw a blow, don't come across as violent. Because his thing was that the people say he followed Mahatma Gandhi, and there's probably a lot of credence in that. But the argument was that you would see more favorably if you're non-violent. And his father, in Joby, represent the African diaspora, people in the West. T'Challa and his father, T'Chaka, represent the continental African, the African who was born on the continent. And there's this tension between the two that plays out in the film. There's this tension that plays out between the two. It seems as though, ironically, Joby, who is Killmonger's father, who is killed by his brother and left, the body isn't even brought back to the US. Nor is Killmonger as a young boy, brought back to Wakanda. Maybe he was doing it deliberately, playing on the tension between the diaspora and the continental African. And the other thing is that, ironically, Killmonger and his father ideologically are more in line with the ideology of the Black Panther Party, this notion of fighting against oppression, this notion of fighting, in a very assertive manner against all forms of oppression across the planet. That's what the Black Panther Party represented. Whereas T'Challa, by contrast, was much more conservative. He, if you like, was like the Martin Luther King. So Killmonger is like the Kwame Ture, Willie Ricks, Malcolm X. T'Challa, who is the real Black Panther, ironically is very distinctly different from the Black Panther Party. But I'm just going to leave it there so that the other panelists can touch on some other points. But those are my perspectives. Michelle, this is a real comment.
Yes. This is going to get really exciting because you jump right into the heart of the matter. I'm more of an extemporaneous speaker who's making this presentation one of the few went into this Killmonger situation, and my boxing gloves are out because I have a completely different perspective on that and on him. So I'll throw it to the audience. We'll talk about that. There's definitely something to put the sticker pin in that we'll get back to, but I have some very interesting and different opinions on Killmonger than you do. So I'm Michelle Serri. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker in residence here for the semester. And so, for me, as a filmmaker watching the film, I was more taken by the politics of the film than anything else. I enter cinema and I look at cinema in terms of representation and politics. So in terms of the creative elements and production design, that kind of stuff, number one, the executives behind the marketing of this film did a wonderful job putting all of that stuff out on the internet. Every single element that you could be interested in is out there. So I won't bore you with those details, you can totally do a Google search, but I'm sure there are a couple of people in the room who've seen this video that I'm going to show, but I'm going to show it because for me that was the hook. That was the hook. The hook being the thing that made me have to see this film. My friend Tai2 sent me a video, which I will share with you, and that was the inciting thing for me. I need to go see this film because of this video. So whilst I know the video, I'm going to throw it to the audience. If anybody wants to share for them who's seen the film, what was the hook? What was the thing that got you interested that you had to see Black Panther? Anybody?
Representation.
Representation? Who said that? Representation. Representation of what?
Myself.
Of yourself.
A black man.
As a black man. Okay. Representation, you as a black man. Anybody else?
That's it. Badass action. The costuming looked awesome. The style looked great. The little bits that you could see in terms of the characters, that looked great. So, and I love the show from one there, so yeah.
Okay, so the actress. Anybody else? Not to try and find older. Anybody else? Anybody else? Women?
The beautiful black women.
Yeah, that's it.
The aesthetic? What's specifically about that?
Cinematography, costume design, everything.
Okay. The aesthetic.
Where it was presented.
How it was presented. Was it the first time for you seeing so much reflection of just like African aesthetic in terms of the costume, where it is that they would have been the inspiration for those? Or kind of painting all of those different types of African Chinese?
No, not really. But I like the philosophy of art, so I think that would be natural. I'm into the philosophy of art, so it would be natural for me to just gravitate towards that.
Okay. Anybody else?
Fearless black women.
Fearless black
Fearless black
women.
women. All their glory.
All right, great. So that gives me an entry.
And it gives everyone, and I think it puts a different look on women, black women. They weren't pushed aside or anything like that. They were standing and fighting, and they had a seat right beside the males.
Right beside the males. Okay, I was going to start with one video, but because the two of you have said this, I'm going to start with another video, which the one for me, the hook, I'll show them both. But I'll start with this one just because we ended on this. The women of Wakanda, because that was the second thing for me. That was one thing. Because for me, I heard that Ava DuVernay was supposed to direct this film initially, right? And then she turned it down. And I wondered, why would she have turned it down? And the truth is, the people are going to hate me. I'm just telling you my truth, right? My truth is that after watching the film the first time, I came away thinking, I can see why Ava turned this down.
Ava, was that script wouldn't have been written when she was involved. Because that's definitely Ryan's script.
I get you, but the comic book existed, and the themes in here, I think there would have been certain things she would have had to have stuck to. So that's one, right? I thought Ava DuVernay, this female director, and why did she may not want to do this? So I'm going to show this video about the representation of women, and then I will show the video, which was really the hook for me, the thing that made me want to watch this film. Okay, does that work? The scientist was woman. That's great, because the third video I have is all about the science behind the film. So I have three videos, two of which are the anatomy of a scene that the directors are broken down, one about Pan-Africanism, one about the science in the film, and the third video is really talking about the representation of women and why I find that a little bit problematic within those three. Okay? So
and he committed to having that number of women around him, and they were all very specific, very individual, very powerful in our own ways, and therefore very effective and influential. This is a nation at a very, very pivotal moment in its development. They have some crucial questions to answer, and so Brian really wanted this story to be led by those questions. Who am I and who are my people? And the women contribute to the answering of that question, which is the way the world is.
Seeing these women, seeing this Dora Milaje and Shuri, these women who support him. He can't do it without them. He can't, there is no king without a queen. Is the thought, the sentiment in African nations, and so that queen is his mother, his sister, the all-female guard, and behind the scenes it's Brian Cooper with his first AD, his director of photography, his costume designer, his production designer. So they are kings because of queens.
My king.
Some is Letitia likes something when she walks in. I was there for her audition. It's like, listen, all these girls are great, but what she had, that's my thing. Now you do whatever you want to do, I'm just saying.
Wait side of the room is busted. Just try.
She embodies, I think, what her sister should be in a movie like this. And she brings the aspect of the child out that I would love being able to show. That is somebody from your mother. And the fact that she's on the council, there's a feeling that she doesn't necessarily agree with my decision to go get the artist. So there's respect factor there. But my own man. But like here, I love the fact that she has her own mind. And I have to deal with that as a man. Okoye allows you to have another dimension of how to problem. Because she's so good at what she does that she's protecting me on another level. She's like another suit. It's a very rich experience in terms of the characters. I think about this playing with the roles. And being inside of it, it's fulfilled.
Have these characters reflect, have Shuri, this young, spunky, tech-savvy woman leading Wakanda's technological charge. That's powerful. It's a really important image for young girls to get.
My thing is, they were all still in service to him, right? And that when the film ended, I was thinking, with all these powerful women, they could have been the head of Wakanda. They could have, so I had some issues around that. So let me show you my hope now, which is the director breaking down a fight scene and also revealing something that I hadn't quite picked up when I was looking at the press around the film and stuff. When I saw this, I was kind of sort of a believer, more of a believer than I had been.
So this scene takes place in the second act of the film. T'Challa, played by Travis Baldwin, and Takeda, played by Lupita Nyong'o, and Okoye, played by Delani Deneuve, are on a covert mission to distract Connor's number one enemy, Ulysses Claw. The mission's kind of spearheaded by Lupita Nyong'o here. This magnificent green dress, her costume designer 3D printed actually. A lot of African symbolism here, with kind of text is drawn in lines and boxes as opposed to round shapes. At the same time, Lupita looks fierce and like a warrior. Different hairstyles you see her in too. We got a big emphasis on Wakanda's having natural hair. There's a lot of motifs about femininity, especially black femininity here in this scene. When you cut to the credit, you see her in this red dress. The accent with gold to bring out a little bit of Wakanda. And the gold is kind of a ranking system. But the more important thing here is that she's wearing a wig for the door. Big thing for them is symbolism of their bald head. When they come to a modern, they shave their heads. So go to interfere with the transactions happening. She's yelling at her to stand down, but she makes the mistake of yelling at her in close up. This is a quick right here, close up. She yells, yeah, which is Wakanda in close up for stand down. We saw that in goals and before they actually hear that. So when she gets discovered, she's happy to just let the Wakanda know. Somebody touches her quick. That's the first thing that somebody does. And an idea of how Wakanda is reacting to being touched unwarranted. This idea of not being in control of your own body. You're having to be touched by people who both like to get touched by. And it also comes with being a woman as well. Down here, it's somewhere about right here. The kid is somewhere down here on this first floor. And these ways, the body's now isolated. Isolated up here on the second floor. But when you turn on his head, she's a really powerful warrior. This is when you kind of see her shine. Big theme in this is tradition versus innovation. So we broke character down in a way it's traditional. She fights in a very traditional style. It almost like dancing when she fights. This is a moment that's been in the script since the first draft. This idea of putting the traditionalist behind it. She being tired is big. She makes comments to the kid she didn't want to have it on in the first place. So as soon as the fight jumps off, she finds a way to take it off. So she ends up throwing it in this guy's face. And she like, that. The impact is like we wanted to cut. So another shot to Charlie showing that he still wasn't aware that the fight had gotten that bad upstairs. It wasn't a real person that was coming down, and this was actually a digital. We put a few CG chips in there too to make it fall for a little more violent. Again, you see the color story here, Shad and Black Panther. Another bit of color story in the film. This is one of the opinions here. This is called the color blue. The color blue represents colonization. So now the fight's on. And Khan's shooting at Ross, T'Challa kicks over this thing here to protect him. He's trying to all about setting up different ways that everybody's going to be fighting. And we have to set up that Shadow Week, playing T'Challa as a super soldier, So let's go to the kids. It's rigged up to a wire, snatching them back. Just to accentuate the fact that Shadow here is not the average bear, it's a super soldier. Now, Ross is shooting with a gun, and T'Challa is engaged with several different people. And it's like a legend. Right? So we turn the idea of femininity on his head. A lot of times you see Wakanda walking around barefoot. It's a barefoot culture. It's like barefoot, it's called sandals. First thing she does, she slams this boom head to her table. She's going to use another weapon that she has. She's going to use that high heel. She's going to take that off, and she's going to drag that right across another bad guy's face. Boom! And now this guy right here, this is another part of the choreography. If we want everything to feel continuous, we want every character to add their own time, that's when we start getting to our long takes. So this is how we get this technique. It'll get broken up by some punctuating because here. Everything is fluid, but it's fluid in our own way. It's aggression. Like, look at this right here. You got the contrast of beauty and aggression. You know what I'm saying? If you don't know about contrast, you got one of the most beautiful people in the world. Making fights like man, she's about to get it going. You know what I mean? She's ready. Can't teach that. So now, she's going to break this little shoulder here. She's going to take this weapon from him. Now this is right here is a very, very difficult shot to achieve technically. It took us a lot of take. So if you start here in the first frame, it's going to go from over the shoulder to build. We have to do here is we have to photo mold it up on a cable rig. And the camera here, there's a big cable rig, okay, that we're sending it up. There's no green screen here, this is all happening live direct. We're down here on the first floor. This is Ruth Peter right here taking the aim with a blanket. This is a CG explosion here on this light. The glass not flying. She shoots these guys who are trying to shoot her. And as you can see, there's a little bit of red right here. That's the line of red. Doing her choreography. Also, another thing is music here. Because a little bit more, so this is music. And this is where you hear the door key. This is where you hear the synagogue. Get her. And that kind of comes into play whenever you hear the door, really getting in there fight. It's a big shift musically here. As you get ready to send this camera on this cable rig. Once it arrives up here, we got a guy standing by, We actually fix it up and takes them. So the night is engaging these guys here. And this is really what we see in Rashawn. That music is going. She takes this dude out here, catches him there, see a little bit of CG accentuation, that shocking mechanism when there's a play. So that was here in this video for the show. It's all channel, all anti circuits, all work. And I'm just denying here. I can tell you the spirit is real the way, the reverse spirit. But this farm, this dude is going to take off of this balcony here after you get shot by this spear. And that was a real fall. That's what you go on from the second story, down to the pad here, to the hard burger here. This scene was shot very early in our shooting schedule. So it was something that we kind of bookmarked. We should get this right one. So it set the tone for the rest of the film. And I had, to scale model 3D print, this whole set. It's shot on my desk all the time. I had a little small scale, almost like action figures that I just let everybody out. We work the script to really make sure we're getting descriptive on what levels all of our Wakandans were at, what levels South African adversaries were at, where Ross was. It was very, really fun to work out. Pretty stressful, big expensive set. But at the same time, I'll be in my office, kind of took back to being a kid, playing with toys again. So it was really fun.
So that was it for me. I saw this video and I was really going through it. Right? And so that covered almost everybody's points, right? That covered almost everybody's points, right? In this video here. It's always good to talk to a director. And so I won't show the third video on science. I'm going to leave with this because my time is almost up. I believe that Killmonger, that character, represents the spirit of war. And if I have to relate it back to something in Caribbean folklore, I just saw Tija and his brother just like old John. That energy of might is always right. And I believe that he represents white supremacy. In the film, they say, he's one of ours, he's one of us, he is one of us. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that, and I will show just one more video, which is not the one I said I was going to show, but a video, a very short trailer from this film called The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I don't know if any of you know this film. Anybody knows it? Raise your hand if you know of this film, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Right? I thought of Killmonger and I realized in the film, they don't talk too much about his mom, right? Who his mom would have been. So I did some lineage trekking of my own and came up with this backstory for Killmonger. And I decided that he was the son, his mom was the daughter of the lead character in The Spook Who Sat by the Door and the Dahomey Queen in the film. And they got together, and she got together with his father in the film. And that's where Killmonger comes from. That history of, I don't know if people who've seen The Spook Who Sat by the Door. It's a film about a black man who's the first black man in the CIA, and he pretends to be an Uncle Tom, so that he could then teach inner city black people all about guerrilla warfare. So I feel that Killmonger just came from that tradition, that urban tradition, and that urban hurt and all of that stuff that happened to black Americans, especially in Oakland, in California. So in case everybody's taking me seriously, I'm not being serious. But I'll show you all the trailer. I see people looking at me very, very seriously. I'm joking. But I will show you all the trailer and I need to see it. And then I will hand it over. So here we go. Spook Who Sat by the Door trailer from the 70s. And apologies for the audio, but it's up on this, so I can't bring it any higher.
There was a mistake. Wasn't letting you in. And let me congratulate you on being the first Negro officer in the Central Intelligence Agency. There was a mistake. Was letting you in.
That's the longest grandfather on the side.
For 5 years, he worked at token Negro. You people must serve. For 5 years, he kept his cool.
appreciated him very much because I think it's an opportunity to have a conversation about radicalism versus a more diplomatic approach to the issues that the Black community is facing. I think that there are certain comparisons that could be made, for instance, historically, the Henri Christophe versus Alexander Pétion. And so in the end of everything, especially seeing the ending of Black Panther with that UN scene. Anybody raise your hand if you think that scene was really problematic? That ending? Anybody with me in this? That ending was problematic? I would have loved to be in the studio and hear that conversation because I feel like the director put that at the end because he had an issue with it too. And so for me, I don't think, my ending statement is I don't think Hollywood is quite as revolutionary as we think they are for this film because then that ending would not be there. And until I see that film about the Haitian Revolution, for instance, with Cecile Fatiman right up there with Dutty Bookman, until that happens, I'm not quite on the wagon. So that's it.
My name is Isis Hall, and so I'll have a few images to show, and hopefully I can show a tiny video clip at the end if all goes well with the audio and visual. Okay. So I guess thinking about this film well, I saw it twice. I've only seen it twice. And the first time I was in the theater, is that offensive? I should have seen it 900 times?
No.
It's coming. That was funny, guys. That was funny. Okay, so when I saw it the first time, of course I was blown away. People silently screaming in the theater, actually loudly screaming in the theater. And then I think I gave it about a month, and then I saw it again. And I was like, interesting. And in that month time, that month gap, I also watched an episode of Shaka Zulu. And then I said, oh. This is a painting from 1708. It's Marquise de Leville by Hyacinth Rigueur. So just enjoy this image. Can anyone find the African? So, from Negro to nigger to black to enslaved property, but still Negro. To other, to colored, back to black, to African American, to nigger, to African American without a hyphen. And now still a nigger, but with a capital B in black. These shady words and terms have been used since the 18th century. So these shady words and terms have been used since the 18th century to identify those of us who are non-white, non-Asian, non-Hispanic, and non-Indigenous in what has been since 1776, the United States of America. To put it bluntly, to be African or a descendant of Africans has always, in the American and European colonial imaginary, meant being less than. This kind of conscious and subconscious social conditioning is what led Marcus Garvey to speak those famous rallying words to his fellow black people in 1938. We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. And the persistence of this kind of conscious and subconscious social conditioning throughout the African diaspora influenced the beliefs of Rastafari, led Burning Spear to create the album Marcus Garvey in 1975, and led Bob Marley to reggae-fy, to use Kwame Dawes' term, to reggae-fy Garvey's Pan-African worldview on the song Redemption Song in 1980. But what I'm talking about right now is not going to be about music, though I will shout out Kendrick Lamar for getting Felix to bring it. And also for putting the music together for this film. Yes. So visually, Eddie Murphy's, I'm going to move to another image, hold on. So visually, Eddie Murphy's 1988 film, Coming to America, offered a critical new image for America's African descendants to visualize during the long, arduous process of freeing oneself from the mental slavery that has, for centuries, limited how Africa has been understood or imagined. So, I suppose what I'm arguing is that Coming to America was critical in helping Black America confront its misunderstanding of Africa, while also allowing Black America to imagine a new story about Africa. So, reimagining Africa through Zamunda, which is where Coming to America is coming out of, this fictional nation ruled by James Earl Jones' kingly character in this film, gave Black people in the diaspora a different story out of Africa. Of course, this fictional kingdom was not perfect by any means, but it did disrupt prior imaginings of the continent through its depictions of an Africa that was not hungry, was not diseased, was not poor, and was not war-torn. In the African kingdom of Zamunda, Africans were healthy, fertile, and rich with gold and cash. And this is important because this was one of the first imagining of Africa in this different and disruptive kind of ways in terms of popular culture, right? So this is how we want to think about it in that sense. So these images help to contrast the dominant images offered in cartoons, literature, magazines, and the news media. Take, for example, the visual power of a fictional Africa that the mind constructs. I will give you no visual. That the mind constructs when reading Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan series. And I think we can all call forth that Africa. And that was written between 1912 and 1965. So that image, that Tarzan Africa image, has lingered into the present day. So if you consider the visual impact of Jane Goodall's Africa, the continent where she worked tirelessly to study and save chimpanzees, that remains today, as many continue to think of Africa as a land of animals more than people. And one has to recognize the power of print that's printed in pages of the National Geographic magazine, where since 1888, photographers have captured and constructed Africa for so many thousands of households throughout the Americas and the world. So these are the dominant images that we've had of Africa, right? Okay. So this is an image of Beyonce in 2011 for the L'Officiel Paris cover shoot that she did, where she was in blackface, and of course she caught a bit of heat for doing so. And you notice these quote-unquote African symbols that she's imbued with, right? So she's got this scarf on, she's got this dark skin on her face, or dark makeup on her face. We have the images behind her, and all of this is to Africanize her, I suppose. Okay. So again, just to kind of push this image, or push this understanding of how a film like Black Panther is going to impact us just on a popular level, and how it's always been doing this, right? So beyond Black Panther, or I guess prior to Black Panther, how is Africa been imagined even in our dress? Through images of a particular view of an animal Africa, a backwards Africa, primitive African Africa has been created. Zebras, acacia trees, lions, loincloths, dark skin, and bare breasts. Distended bellies, warlords, possessed dictators, malaria, Ebola, and brutal female circumcision. And for the descendants of Africa, the image of the African in America is equally stereotyped and limited. And this is where I suppose we go into the Killmonger character, who represents African Americans. With Black Panther, what it means to be Black or African is shifting from being redefined by the diversity of the films, and being redefined by the diversity of the film's lead actors. Of course, we have Chadwick Boseman, we have Denai Guerrera, Lupita Nyong'o, Michael B. Jordan, Winston Duke, and Letitia Wright. So this cast that hails from the U.S., Kenya, Mexico, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana all play characters with deep, reflective interiority to complement their physical strength. And this represents a new story, and perhaps a new idea about Afrofuturism. Black Panther also offers a new story about how we have held on to Africa as a past rather than as a future. Just read this image, if you will, of Killmonger looking at African artifacts in the British Museum. Isn't this how Africa has remained locked up, conditioned, and curated by Europeans for so many of us living outside of Africa? So this, I think, again, is the value that this film is adding. Is it pushing us to consider, well, what do we know about Africa? I always thought of myself as having a very privileged background. And when I say privilege, what I'm talking about is a full awareness of Africa, right? I had the privilege of growing up with a full awareness of Africa as a real space. Yet, right, despite all of that, because of all the visuals that I received, right, I learned about Africa through text, right, through oral stories, through words, but the visuals I received about Africa were of those distended bellies, those giraffes, those zebras, and so there's a way that imagery, I guess, takes over the mind to some degree, right? So how does this film help to push against that in terms of the visuals that it offers? I think it's really interesting space. So, one more image. Marvel made Black Panther, and now you want to see me for green? And I think this is kind of how we have reacted, in a sense, in the diaspora, to this film. So this meme has been around for a few years now, and it's had comments about UNICEF, it's had all sorts of comments associated with it. But how does this image get, I guess, reinterpreted now that the film is out? And there's this kind of Wakanda pride, this African pride that is now there. And finally, so, okay, I don't want to read that. Hopefully there's audio. No. Well, I was going to show you a clip of Chadwick Boseman when he performed on Saturday Night Live on April 7th, and it was all kinds of hilarious, and the reason it's in this format is because SNL maintains all of its property. Alas, I can describe just a part of it because I think it would have been useful. You're going to need to know about Black America and how Black America is understanding the world and seeing the world. You're going to be able to communicate with people. So this is a really interesting kind of setup here.
Alright, let's keep going. Let's take a grown ass for 6 hours. Alright. You send your smart ass child here because she thinks she broke. T'Challa.
What is to one of our free universities? Was she in a black ass?
Oh my God. What a free university.
Great scientist.
Okay, so again, one of those responses that are really powerful. To one of our free universities where she can become a great scientist. Because in Wakanda, that's a reality. Not in Black America, right?
Okay, well, the answer we was looking for was out my damn house. You know what? I'm gonna give it to you, T'Challa. Y'all know not have no mean streets in Wakanda. Alright, what was yours?
Very well. Let's go to our hell now.
The policeman says there's been some robberies in your neighborhood and asks if you have any information.
What is? Not only do I tell this man what I know, try to down the agenda. Our ministers of law enforcement are only here to protect us.
Hey, no snitching. I've been there to like no snitching.
So the idea of no snitching as being the automatic response for the Black American community, of course in light of the Black Lives Matter and all of the various bodies of Black people who have been killed brutally by law enforcement. T'Challa's like, of course, I report this, and I even helped to take down the assailants. So again, seeing this huge space between the two.
I mean, it should be. I don't think you have to spend much time in America. Let's just hear about today's prizes. Johnny?
Thanks, Darnell. Today's Black Jeopardy winner will receive Use the Hole Marker. First one plastic containers that use the hole. Well done, Steaks. If I see a speck of red, it's going back. My food, well done, Steaks. And by Sprite. How did we become a black soda?
How did we become the black soda?
Do you guys know?
Future.
Who wants to do another Sprite? All right, T'Challa, what was yours?
I'm ready. Let's go to white people for 400.
Okay, let's try it. Your friend Karen brings her potato salad to your cooking. Uh-oh, T'Challa.
I think I'm getting the hang of this. Before I answer, a few questions. This woman, Karen, she is Caucasian, eh?
Yes.
See, that's an old recipe for potato salad. Eh? Ah, I understand. It is noble that she would volunteer to cook for everyone. And although I have never had potato salad before, I sense that this white woman does not season her food just It is only with a tiny bit of salt. She will probably add something unnecessary like raisins. Something tells me that I should say, oh, hell no, Karen. That's potato
Saturday Night Live. Okay, so I think I will end now, and I walk over.
Hello, everyone. I'm Moji. I'm in the department. I wish there were a department of anthropology, ISIS. There is no such thing at this time. I'm in the Department of Sociology, Psychology, and Social Work. I am I am an anthropologist. Soon. I wanted to go last, partly because of stage fright, but also because I wanted to know what other people were going to say so that I could cut this list down a little bit and not talk about everything that I had to talk about. So I'm going to do something that's going to make Michelle very, very happy, because I'm going to start by quoting a Haitian man. I'm going to quote, I'm on sabbatical, so I have all this time to read books. It's a wonderful luxury. And just yesterday I was reading Michel Rolfe Trio's Silence Take the Past. And he had something to say about the production of history and the power implicated in the production of historical narratives that I thought was actually quite relevant to this discussion. So I'm going to quote him. He talks about historical narratives as being a particular bundle of silences. And he says, the differential exercise of power that makes some narratives possible, he talks about the differential exercise of power that makes some narratives possible and silences others. And he says tracking power requires a richer view of historical production than most theorists acknowledge. And funnily enough, he says, next to professional historians, we discover artisans of different kinds. He lists a whole bunch of different artisans, politicians, students, fiction writers, but also filmmakers. And I thought, hey, that's what we're talking about. So I think that these quotes from Michel Rolfe Trio are interesting because what the movie is, I think, is an attempt to end the silence, or put some noise in the silence, or reject the silence that has been created by the white supremacist system when engaging in the story of Africa and the story of blackness. And he makes a very good point that historians are doing their job and doing it very well, but there are also other people in society who are also trying to create or work against silence. And so I think we can see this movie as a particular type of action against silences that have been created over the centuries by a particular group in power. So that's the kind of way I'm seeing this movie. So at the same time that the movie can be seen as rejecting silences, we can also say, based on what Michel Rolfe Trio is saying, that any narrative is also going to end up creating other silences. And I think part of what we've already heard is that within this narrative that has been created by Ryan Coogler and Joe Cole, is that Anthony Joe Cole, the other writer? Sure, some silences have been filled or rejected. But then of course other silences are created. And I think that's really interesting to think about as well. There's an imaginary Africa that is being created, or imaginary Africa / Wakanda. And even the interrelation between Africa and Wakanda is something that I don't think we've necessarily talked about yet. But so in the creation of this imaginary Wakanda, this imaginary Africa, what's being silenced? That's a pretty interesting thing to think about. Michael mentioned at the very beginning, and caused all kinds of murmuring in the audience and on the panel, ideas about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I have seen some comparisons or relationships, associations made between T'Challa as Martin Luther King and Killmonger as Malcolm X. What I think is really important, especially because we just passed, was it the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King? The assassination, right? Yeah. I think what's really interesting is that there's so many silences in the story of Martin Luther King. And at least the people I listen to are always complaining about the silences, because they say that towards the end of his life, and perhaps a reason for his actual assassination, was that Martin Luther King was being extremely radical. Extremely radical. He talked about his own country as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He started getting into the weeds talking about Vietnam, and how the US's involvement in Vietnam was absolutely morally reprehensible. He started talking about capitalism and how capitalism is hurting not just black people, but poor people in general. He was talking about these issues that were making the superstructure, the white supremacist system, even more upset with him than before. It was easier to deal with him if he wasn't going to engage in radical talk. Malcolm X wasn't the problem. Martin Luther King could be handled. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's nuance in the story of Martin Luther King, just as there's nuance in the story of Malcolm X. There's also nuance in the story of Killmonger, and there's nuance in the story of T'Challa. And I don't think it really serves our purposes to decide that one type of personage can be superimposed on another. So I'm not prepared to decide that Killmonger is Malcolm or that T'Challa is Martin. I think what this gives an opportunity to realize is the complexity of those two characters, the people who actually were alive, Malcolm and Martin, and then see if a similar complexity is being engaged with the way that T'Challa and the way that Killmonger are represented in the movie. I think so. For example, we have Chadwick Boseman, who plays T'Challa. When I read this interview with him, I was like, what? He was talking to Ta-Nehisi Coates, the Lupita Nyong'o. And you know who he said the villain was? Who? T'Challa. So the actor who was playing T'Challa was saying that T'Challa was a villain. Why? Because T'Challa refused to open up the country to the rest of the world, to the rest of, let's say, their brothers and sisters to help them. They were happy to be cloistered and enjoy their wealth by themselves, right? So that's a different kind of a reading by the man who was playing the character himself. We have, he's African American. We have Killmonger, who I just refuse to call a villain. I never called Killmonger a villain because he had some, his basic point was valid. This is just a destructive, system. It's, what you say here? Oh, no more. Okay, sorry. Okay, so it's a destructive system, white supremacist system, it has to be fought against, right? Now his methods you can totally take issue with. But the premise of his argument, which is that this has to be fought, and we don't have the luxury of standing back and just enjoy our little piece of luxury and privilege, I think is a valid one. So I never really saw a villain at all. Chadwick Boseman, the man who played T'Challa, thought that there was a villain, and he said that that was the character he himself was playing. But I think what that does is mess with this easy binary opposition that we've actually been taught in the past about what Malcolm X, for example, represented and what Martin Luther King represented. And so this is another kind of way to get past these silences that are constantly being forced upon us as people, as African people, and as people in the African diaspora. Okay? And I just want to talk a bit about, Michelle's going to give me 8-minute warning, so I don't want to go over. I want to talk about aesthetics. We were talking about that a little bit before. And I want to talk about the play that was involved in the aesthetics that we saw. So I've been saying to people, I want to watch the movie again for the 3rd time. And I want to just freeze frame, especially when the big fights are happening. Because you're seeing all these beautiful looking people with beautiful outfits. I just want to look at all of them. We know from Ruth Carter, the costume designer, that she picked aesthetics from various ethnic groups on the continent. And I like that idea of play. I know some people can actually have a problem with that in the sense that it's this kind of almost incoherent mishmash of traditional aesthetics, which is certainly an argument. I like the play element involved though. What I also liked was, do you remember the gentleman with the lip club? I saw the movie in Carried once and in Sovereign once. And I think it was in Sovereign, when he came up onto the screen, there were giggles in the audience. You heard that? You heard that too? Who else heard giggles? Interesting. I heard that giggle when I'm in my class, Anthropology of Africa, talking about loincloths. People go, why are they giggling? There's an association with primitiveness and savagery. What I thought the play was that, did you see what he was wearing? That suit was hot. As in, you wouldn't know this, guys, but as the young people say, his outfit was on fleek. I can still say that? No. Okay. I really thought fire. It's lit. Okay, I need lit. I could have said that too. So the point is though that he's wearing this lip club, which is supposed to be associated with of the stereotypically African with the stereotypically European. And so throughout the movie, you see these kinds of, I guess, rejections, maybe I would say, of these binaries. And so I'm kind of going ignorant. So I'm kind of going against the man himself, Ryan Hoover, who said, he wrote on his own, tradition versus innovation. I am so sorry, Ryan. I don't think you're really doing that so much. I'm looking at you like you're Ryan, I'm sorry. I don't think, Ryan, that he was really, I don't think that's not the message that I got for a lot of the time. I think he was trying to actually sort of erase that boundary between the two. Even when I was talking about technology, there was a talk earlier that Enrico Kennedy had on the relevance of history. And we talked about Black Panther, I think it was me, talked about Black Panther. And I was talking about how even when African Americans want to present technology, it's going to be a European style technology. And my father was in the audience, said later, I didn't understand what you said, which was his diplomatic way of saying what you said was foolishness. And he made a very good point, that historically, as Michael said in that same panel discussion, we have been at the forefront of technological innovation. If you want to take us, several centuries back, thousands of years back. So again, there's just a mixture. What do we call in technology? What are we calling backward? What do we call in tradition? What do we call in innovation? Because really what my father pointed out to me was that there was a mixture of this thing we might call tradition and this thing we might call innovation in the movie. So you have that whole tradition of having to lie down and be covered with the mud when you're being made into the king, right? And then you have Liberia. You have this floating, whatever those were. Railways? Two things up there. So you have that mixture. So again, where is this line? Is there a line? Should there be a line? Maybe not. So my book, maybe. Although to be honest, it didn't drag me in because I had to think about it a bit more after having my emotional reaction, just like I insisted. Was that they're playing with these ideas of we've been told to be taken for granted. That one thing represents this, and that another thing represents that, and never the twain shall meet. No, actually, and especially as Caribbean people, we should understand this idea of mixing, not true? Creolization, right? So I think that this is something that really resonated with me. There's no firm binaries in this movie. There probably are. But the ones I talked about, you can see that there are, at least in certain cases, there aren't firm binaries. And that's something that's really grown on me as I thought more and more about this movie. So I'll leave that there. Thank you very much.
Open it up for question and answer and any comments, perspectives about the film. I'm going to ask Monique to come up and take this microphone around as we identify different people.
Because I expected really cool action. That's what Marvel provides you with. But on the idea of technology, that's kind of what's blowing my mind. Listen to all of you talking about the idea of innovation and technology. T'Challa's sister creates sneakers. The corniest line in the entire movie. Because that's what we're going to use to sneak around. You know, I call it sneakers. Did you get it? He didn't laugh, so that's why I didn't laugh, because I like T'Challa. Anyway, the whole idea of this for me was just watching this thing and thinking, why does this look like Iron Man? So we're talking about technology, we're talking about Africa, but this really looks like Iron Man. I'm watching a black Iron Man in a really cool suit, like Captain America suit, with claws. That's my point.
I guess we'll take some more comments and then we can all respond.
Watching the video didn't like half the jokes. I just wanted to know if you know the idea of two-ness that W.B. Du Bois talks about, and you look at it and Get Out with him in the sunken place, the idea of the SNL being mainly a white viewership is talking about black people. It's saying they're looking at it from black people's perspective, but it's the white perspective of the black perspective. Does that make sense? Just because, I only saying that because the person watching the video didn't get half the jokes. They spelled finna wrong, he didn't know what that was. when he saw FID and apostrophe NA. I've never seen that spelling before in my life.
Right.
So I just wanted to know like your comments on that.
I see your point though. I understand the double consciousness. I understand how Du Bois would figure in here, but I think what we want to consider more than, is it that he's not understanding these jokes because these jokes are meant for a white audience? I think he might not be reacting to the jokes on time because of how the jokes are delivered, right? Which might then say something to the certain delivery style of SNL comedians, perhaps there's something there. But as someone that's admitted to not watching SNL, I think that there's a certain kind of formula that he uses, especially for Black Jeopardy, and how the jokes come out. And so yes, he had to follow it. As far as Fitna and him not being able to read it, the reacting person not being able to make sense of the word, there isn't a standard spelling for it, right? So I think it's just a non-standard, there isn't a standard spelling for dialect or for some of these slang words. So I'm not sure that he was able to immediately understand what was happening in that moment. So I agree with you, but then I also kind of urge you to push a bit past him to understand, I guess, how you're reacting to the Black Jeopardy piece in itself.
Like, I felt like he felt like when they're saying jokes, I was like,
can I just say something too? Because I'm just saying, because of the way SNL works with their copyright, we were watching it more for SNL and not for the guy watching it. To me, it had nothing to do with the guy watching it. If we could get a clip, it would have just been the SNL clip.
I know.
The guy watching it, because the guy watching it is also putting it up for his views and his whole thing. You know what I mean? There's a whole genre of YouTube about
but there
reaction.
seems to be a bit of a delay, I think, in how he's reacting, right? Say out loud what he just understood, as if he was also translating it perhaps for his viewers. So I think Carlene's right in the sense of maybe we shouldn't, unfortunately we had to watch it the way we watched it. But if we could somehow divorce him from the text and see just how we respond, and also how Keenan's responding. So the idea is that Keenan's response as the host of Jeopardy, that is the Black American response. And the other contestants, that is the Black American response. And then there is what T'Challa's offering and his awareness in the end of, that's how humor works, and that's what's going on in America.
Also, having actually watched it, because I actually watched it as well, it was hilarious.
I didn't come at this from someone who's totally into the Marvel universe at all either, but I totally get your point. But the thing that stood out for me in what you said and what you had said earlier too was the way in which you say the creator did not want to tackle this. And also in your presentation, he tried to distance himself from the Black Panther movement and all of that. And that is something that I think is really interesting around the politics of what kinds of films get made, what kinds of films get the green light. For instance, Danny Glover had been trying to make this film about the Haitian Revolution for forever, for decades, and cannot get this funded because it's Black people eating the crap out of Europeans who came to try to colonize, right? So here we have in this film, number one, what's interesting is that it's a conversation, it's a film where we're not having a conversation about should we be fighting white supremacy, it's a how should we be fighting white supremacy, which is interesting, but at the same time, my problem with the ending too goes right back to the distancing. I feel like the film is distancing itself from radical politics and trying to make a statement that we shouldn't. Because we see in the ending that UN thing, T'Challa is sitting there and gaining the approval of this European CIA agent who's there nodding at him, Tanya, give me a second. That's my reading of it. And so I found that problematic because at the end of the day too, even when they were in jail, no, I really find it problematic. That must be Janet. Yes. Yeah, I find that problematic because also in the jail, sometimes let me just say this last thing. In the jail, when what's her name? The Nigeria's character is being aggressive with the dude, Okoye, and then T'Challa. And I like T'Challa's, non-misogynistic, balanced masculinity. It's not toxic like what that Killmonger character is supposed to kind of sort of represent too. But at the same time, all of this needing this man's approval, that says something to me about how far we have come. And even though it's an opportunity for us, for Black people to be talking about their own problems in that space within the film world, it's still Black people fighting each other. Let me see that that Haitian Revolution film, and then I'll, be ready to judge Hollywood on its readiness to let people who tell those stories, because at the end of the day, remember those Sony leaks and all of these racist emails and stuff that went through, they are still the gatekeepers. They are still the gatekeepers, and there is still just a certain level of conversation that we are being allowed to have. That's my point.
Good point. Nonetheless, I think what you all said was very amazing. Dr. Barnett, I like that you started off with the Black Power to Black Panther, and I just wanted to know, I guess all of you, what do you guys think about Killmonger representing what African American psychiatrist William Greer and Price M. Cobbs refers to as Black Rage, right? It's the concept, or it's this state of mind in which the Americans, because of the unrelenting racial oppression, they become so mad, so psychotic that they lash out, right? What do you guys think about Killmonger representing that? That Black Rage against his African brothers and sisters, and Black Rage against himself as a Black man, and Black Rage against his own African Americans, just Black people in general, right? And I think there's this perspective out there where Black people, the diaspora, there's an argument that Africans sold us out. They contributed to the African slave trade, right? And I created that link in my mind with Killmonger being so aggressive towards his African brothers and sisters, destroying that herb, doing things that weren't rational, right? As a Black man himself. So what do you guys think about that?
The continental African as represented, Killmonger represents the African American or the diasporic African, and this notion that the Black Rage is an issue that diasporic Africans have. And T'Challa and his father represent this, I think, continental Africa, but we have to be careful, it's not balanced. It's not balanced in the sense that they pursue this isolationist perspective, and fair due, they're looking after self-interest and all of this stuff, but I think we need a mediating character, and in many ways, Lupita, the character she plays, what's her name? Nakia, yeah, is in some respects, she is the intermediary figure, but probably because she doesn't be preaching, she's not that preachy, she just out there in the field doing the action, but you can see she's action orientated and she's probably the intermediary. But the key thing is that the Black Rage is seen as a diasporic issue, and I think the truth is you have continental Africans, I'm sure, who feel some rage. Those, in the Congo, they suffered under the Belgium, and colonization wasn't so kind to the continental Africa. Actually, we only got a taste of the whole colonial project when, Shuri, the sister of T'Challa, says to the CIA agent, colonizer, and so forth. So you have some tongue-in-cheek comments here and there, but he wasn't treated like a colonizer, which, Michelle brought up. He was actually one of the heroes in the film, interesting enough. And what's that saying is that an agenda that, the CIA should be considered as the heroes, as being, an institution that is supportive to Africa and so forth. I mean, there's lots to say there. The other thing is Afrofuturism. So Wakanda, if you like, brings this to the table, this imagined Africa, this technological dream. If Africa wasn't colonized, we argue, what could it have been? What could it be if it wasn't? And so Wakanda is this imagined space which has been untouched by the colonizing force, and Black people can make the strides that they need to, because we have to be clear that the continent of Africa is the richest in terms of mineral wealth. But because of the colonizing projects that have occurred, Europe has divided up the continent, the people are the poorest. I mean, I think it's so tragic that most of the population of the continent can't enjoy the wealth. And in South Africa, I'm sorry, South Africa to me is emblematic of the colonial project, because even though, post Nelson Mandela, even post, Winnie Mandela, and give thanks, Winnie Mandela was a true warrior, we see that most of the wealth, the disproportionate amount of wealth, is in the white South Africans' hands. And yes, you have a few wealthy black South Africans, but do they really have anything to celebrate about? The amount of mineral wealth South Africa has speaks to why there was this large white settler community, because that, where the wealth is where, people will gravitate to. But it's such a pity that the black African is not benefiting from that. So I think the woke black African would have some rage as well, but we don't see that in the film. So that's another thing. So what the film does to me is it distances us in the diaspora from the continental African. It's like, we're in different worlds. And I wonder if that is being exaggerated, or is that a reflection of the reality? I think that's the debate we need to have. I mean, it's a topic worth talking about. How connected are we to the continent of Africa as diasporic Africans? And to what extent are we embraced by our brothers and sisters on the continent?
As a member of the Reparation Council, you can tell by the difficulty in mobilizing locals to be a part of the reparation campaign, how connected we are to contacts.
But also just how much radical action is being demonized, because that's a radical action to demand reparation. Now back to this issue of black rage. I have a thought on this, right? I get it, and I do think that on one level, because there are so many different readings you can have of this character and stuff, so I get it. On one level, yes, I see the black rage, but black rage because of what? And then you look at the oppression, you look at the systematic oppression, and just the years of that type of oppression, and then it becomes a bit justified, a bit, right? And you see that T'Challa had some sympathy and some compassion for Killmonger, as did I, right? However, when you start to look at even just the history on another level, there's another reading I have of it. When you look at just the history of even cinema, Hollywood, and you look at genres of cinema, like the Western, and what story, what philosophy of life America was telling about itself when that genre was developed. We came, we saw, we conquered. These white men, these horses, just come and like killing all Indians and whatever. And also just looking also at the history of the Hollywood system and how that started. World War I, it was about war propaganda and putting that out there. The philosophy of life that has developed out of cinema coming from Hollywood has been this thing about come and kill and slaughter and conquer. So for me, Killmonger represents that more than anything else. This kind of, who's been the people going in and like terrorizing people and, causing, not causing wars, but just that military action and might is right. And that to me is more associated with an American kind of militaristic way of thinking, more so than which black rage being a consequence of that, as opposed to being something organic that exists just, within the community or whatnot. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes, but then you see how
of course it's problematic.
It's uncontrollable now.
But it's clarified as to why, right? So I think there was someone that was you mentioned the mother and the father and the experience, so it becomes personal for him. So to say that, this is going to your point earlier, to say that there is nothing redeeming about Killmonger, I think is really deeply problematic. And to throw onto that he's almost not human, is very troubling to me, because of how absolutely human he becomes in the film as someone who has suffered a very personal trauma of losing his father, having a Disney-like trauma of never knowing his mother, to kind of go back to where is this film coming from? And we never know who Disney characters' parents are, really, or at least not their mothers, but to have those missing parents and to think about that trauma, that personal trauma, as justification for the actions. And if nothing else, what this film does in a Black American context is it gives some humanizing quality to the angry Black man. That's what it does. So for all of those Black male bodies that are seen as a threat, that are seen as moving about the American space in a violent and angry and brooding and perhaps even sociopathic way and all of those things. No, there's a reason why, right? And that reason is because his father was killed. His father left him. He was left in a space that became a dangerous space, and he had no other alternatives. We don't know what happened to his mother, but it seems that he becomes the representation, for me, he becomes a representation of the danger of anti-coloniality, right? So the anti-colonial is being violent, right? Is a violent response to colonialism, to want to kill colonialism violently. Just as violently as colonialism occurred, you want to attack it back. That's what he represents. And what we don't necessarily find is the decolonial Afrofuturistic space. It's almost there with Wakanda, but with T'Challa as the leader, he seems to be holding on to tradition, and tradition is not decolonial, right? It needs to just be this kind of, nope, we're going to start anew. And Wakanda doesn't necessarily start anew. Wakanda closes off, but what he wants to do is kill tradition, while T'Challa wants to maintain tradition until the end where he changes his mind a little. Those are my thoughts.
Another sort of argument to say that this is a much more complex reading that we need to give to Killmonger is that at the end of it, as you just kind of wanted under your breath, he convinces T'Challa. T'Challa ends up in Oakland, meaning he's trying to open up Wakanda to the world. Now, I have my other issues about how we decide to open up to the world, and it gets back to this idea of, is this revolutionary or not? Hells no. We're going to code our way to freedom? I don't know about that, right?
The country as opposed to T'Challa. Can you tell me why you thought it was to him and not to the country?
So for me, his mom is there. We have these women figures who are really accomplished and amazing, but at no point in the narrative at all was it ever even suggested that either one of them was capable of being the king or queen, and that's what I'm looking at.
Do you think that was because of lineage? Like if you go back to the idea of tradition, that it has to do with lineage in terms of being firstborn, as opposed to skipping over the firstborn and then going to the secondborn? Because traditionally you go to the firstborn and then the secondborn.
Yes, absolutely, and so that may very well be legit for that story world, but it's just not something that's compelling to me. Because it's a very subjective thing, as I was saying too, and so everybody comes to it for different reasons. And so for me, as a director, as a filmmaker, someone who is very much into like gender politics and just representation and what those things mean in general, that's an issue for me, because it represents for me too just a kind of holding on to a tradition where patriarchy and just that masculine dominated system is the norm. And so I want to challenge that. That's just resonate for me, for why I exist, for how I do things, and how I would approach my critique of stuff.
Your perspective of him as the villain, your view of him as the villain, and you repeated his willingness to kill his girlfriend without blinking an eye. Truth, he had one mission. He had one mission, and the truth is, as much as she was his girlfriend, and she was also a black woman, she was with the enemy. Her mission was with Kra and them. His intention from day one was to use them to get the power he wanted, and then turn around and kill them. So she was a part of the system. As much as she was a black woman and his girlfriend, she was also a part of the very thing he wanted to destroy. She was in support of it. He was only pretending to be in support of it while he was with them.
I've never heard him say that he only sent himself from Black Panther. So yeah, you need to like show me those slides, you know, like show me the receipts. Yeah, the receipts. I need those receipts. Additionally, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Samantha, for mentioning Eric Killmonger's representation of Black American culture, particularly because the scene where Shuri is showing T'Challa the habits, and I made this mention to my friends, but you realize that there are three there. There's the original, there is the silver one that T'Challa wears, and then there's the gold one, right? And one of the ways that I interpreted this scene was that the traditional one that was worn by T'Chaka, his father, that was an extension of the traditionalism that we all perceive as a motive or a thematic element in the film. Sorry. And the one that T'Challa chose, he said it was, I can't remember the word exactly, but it represented something vastly different from the gold one, which to me spoke to how hip-hop culture, the subculture, gold, bling, everything that, you know, you mentioned, even the Beyonce-ness of it all, right? And when he chose the silver one, I was impressed because it spoke to his character, right? And Dr. Ben, our parents are, I completely agree that Killmonger is a villain. And I will go out of my way and say it's because a villain is only as great as the hero, and a hero is only as great as a villain. And though that is a, you know, a sketching and an overgeneralization, yeah, what T'Challa took from him at the end, in my opinion, that was his purpose. That was his purpose, to teach our hero something critical, something that even though it's not fully resolved, hopefully it will be by the next movie. I mean, you have the comics. It's clearly more, you know, explained here, but you know, with the movie that we're all seeing now, we're expecting a lot from it. We're not going to get what we expect.
There's obviously a lot that one can get out of the movie, but one of the things that plays on my mind, and it's something that really crosses color, and that is the disease of selfish individualism. And I think that the world that we have today, where just a few years ago, the statistics showed that there are more billionaires than there have ever been, but also the disparity between rich and poor is the largest it has ever been. So we have a whole bunch of people in this world, which I think is what Killmonger represents, who are disaffected, disillusioned, and completely exacerbated with the system that they are living in. And the rest, and everybody seems to be scrambling and hurting each other in order to get into these higher echelons of power and money, really. And so, so Killmonger, for me, represents that that struggle and that disillusionment by many people in different parts of the world. And we see it playing out even here in Jamaica. And we have a lot of inner city youths who, they're smart, they're not stupid. They're smart, they're strategic, but they're very angry as to how they've been treated by the whole system that has been created globally, which has robbed them of their opportunities in life and put them in a position whereby they feel that they have no alternative but to fight.
Race in America is something that everybody can relate to, everybody can tolerate. The sort of like thing that we're seeing towards the end of his life, which is questioning capitalism. That's a no-no in America, and I agree. Yes, I agree with you, Monji. You said that, and you know, I'll give you that credit. But other than that, let me just think about the one thing that perhaps we haven't talked enough about this in the discussion, which is this is. And I think it was mentioned in passing, but I don't think there was enough emphasis from my perspective, which is this is the diaspora, and it's the diaspora representing Africa, and so that voice of continental Africa, you don't hear it. And when I saw the panel and everything, I think I told Moji I'm going to bring my copy of In My Father's House by Kwame Appiah, and which is it's a philosophy book for those of you who are interested. I think it's quite interesting because it's taking on how Africa has been represented, but not so much how it has been represented by the West, but mostly how it has been represented by the diaspora. And he's taking issue with that representation. He does not identify much of this representation. He doesn't identify with this representation. And I think the title of the book is very telling. It's In My Father's House. It's almost like if I'm going to think of Africa, I need to make it concrete, like specific. And if I start thinking about Africa, it's the experience growing up in my father's house. That's how I relate to Africa. right? So I think I see in this movie this sort of like external representation and internal representation in many ways, but I mean the part is like, for example, the monarchy, right? You see the king. So I don't identify with that. Coming from, you know, like identifying from Central Africa, we didn't have kings, we didn't have queens, and that was, I see it as a sign of victory in many ways. It's like kings and monarchs are our oppressors, right? But in this film, you're seeing Africa represented, idealized, and in the way that it's been idealized, it's almost like we have to think of this as kings and queens, and that is bringing this notion of like how the West understands power and what are those things that we look up to, and so on, which are perhaps not what we others or we will identify with. And the last point that I think I found it quite interesting in the film is that is the hope, right? It's the hope in terms of like, I'm a historian and I know how the diaspora has used African history and the past to sort of like build this sense of identity, common identity, and now is that move to the future, is this Afrofuturism and so on. And I found it, I think, I don't know if troublesome in a way, but I think something that we need to think about it is that it still is this constant need for hope. And is the hope cannot come from within, from the diaspora.
African American and US version of Africa. I'm talking about silences, and I wanted to talk about whiteness as well, and I didn't get to that, I'm afraid. But I think that it's this kind of ongoing contradiction, I think, or let's call it a dialectic. You know, you're trying to sort of submerge this other narrative, but at the same time you're being very much guided by it. So the way that they create this alternative version of Africa, and again, we haven't distinguished between Wakanda and Africa yet, but the way that they create this alternative Africa is very much a response to the white narrative, right? So whiteness is implicit in that idea of Wakanda, because you're trying to say, no, we're not this thing that white people said we are. See, we have X, and then that X brings me to the monarchy. There's a reading of the movie that could be seen as very much Hotepism. Hotepism being that kind of exaltation and romanticization and exotification of Africa that is based on a couple of things that they think Africa represents. It's not fair to say that Enrique needs to be more discerning, because you're making generalizations about Ethiopia. You talk about Ethiopia, there are very, very many ethnic groups in Ethiopia who were fighting against, and were very much against Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was Amhara. Talk to the Oromos about Haile Selassie, you'll get a hell of a story from them. So I think that what we need is, this thing that I've been trying to talk about, is nuance, and not trying to simplify. We can't say that Africa was always, is represented by this idea of monarchy. Monarchy is an oppressive system, as Enrique said. It has many, many aspects to it. And the same idea of how come they decided to choose a particular type of inheritance pattern for the monarchy. How come they decided to pick a situation which had monarchy as the sort of dominant political focus? These are all choices we make, and I think what we're trying to do here is get at why these choices are made, because they're telling their own story, and as I said, they're creating their own silences. So the Fang are silenced in this understanding of Africa, for example, which is an ethnic group that Enrique belongs to.
Hello. I really like the discussion. Just your point, Michelle, about women and about them serving the male figure. Well, one of the few opening scenes when the challenge was being made to him as a king, you know, when his paws were removed and so on. And Nakia was one of the potential challengers. So based on how the story was told, and how, No. Nakia, watch it again. Nakia was put up as one of the challengers, potential challengers. Eventually it was Mbaku, right? But Nakia was put up, the man with that thing in his mouth, right? A what? Lip plug, right? Right. She was side by side with him. She was part of his tribe, and so you don't know what it took for her to get to that point. So it brought me back to your video about tradition versus innovation. And the fact that she was the only female there present who was there as a potential challenger to the throne. No. She was a potential challenger to the throne. Okay. So when you're saying that you didn't get to see areas where these women could actually challenge, that scene actually demonstrated.
Thanks for pointing that out. I think I'm more talking to the choices that you make too, and it speaks back to what lens are we looking at everything through when we're making those choices, because it's creative choices that the creatives, the director, and everybody who's behind this creative enterprise are making about how that world is structured. So they could have made other choices that would have been more, would have brought that gender issue and those women to the fore, is what I'm saying, and what that represents.
But that's why I like the character of M'Baku, because his tribe was more or less isolated from the other tribes who basically submitted more or less to the rule of the Black Panther tribe.
Right. My mother liked him too, when I asked her what was her favorite thing. Thank you for that.
So those other tribes more or less submitted to the authority of the Black Panther. So when the time came for the challenge to be made, Nakia was one of the potential challengers.
And just one in. So we could argue about this forever. I want to talk to what you said about hope. I totally get your point, and I think it's interesting that you bring that up, Breathe the Monarchy, but for me, I think of it in terms of tools. Tools for people in the diaspora who would have been stripped of those things that we believe, for Africans who would not have been enslaved, maybe their belief system and maybe the rituals that they have, the traditions. For me, that was the ability to access your ancestors. So that's something that I think is a pathway to hope, and that hope that we should be looking for, that place that we could be finding hope.
So if you're aware of the Black Panther comic himself, when it first started out before the Black Panther movement, and then after when it came up, Stan Lee, the creator, distanced himself away from Black Panther, so he changed it to Black Leopard, which is why when Killmonger transformed, you see the yellow stripes, yellow spots on his costume. I want to know the symbolism. What do you think of the symbolism of that, of implementing that, and having, although Killmonger being the antagonist, and having the antagonist representing something at that time, distancing themselves away from the Black Panther movement. If you get what I'm saying. And also the fact that for an African movie, or a movie where that collides the Africa and African diaspora, even if you see it in its music, in the soundtrack, it's for an African diaspora audience. So it doesn't play to both sides. In fact, there's only one song on the entire soundtrack, where there's an African artist from South Africa. I'm not sure of his name. So it really plays towards more of a hip hop type of vibe. And I'm wondering if they were being, I'm not sure the word exploited, but I feel like we're being exploited in a sense. They realize that we're stuck in a place where there's no real belong for us. So Hollywood is trying to create a belong for us and create a market for us where they can make money and profit from us. So what do you think of this, the whole creation of African consciousness and the exploitation that's based on it, exploitation?
You seem like you were raising that question. No. Yeah.
That's not for Africa.
Yeah.
Because I'm African, I feel our parents like don't feel African in this practically.
Yeah.
But you feel like musically, culturally, that
it's not authentically African.
You make it work on diaspora, and that's great.
Yeah.
But African itself, not be I'm making it Africa.
Right.
Well, I think,
okay, very good point.
I think that's kind of following up from what Enrique was saying. I mean, this is an African American imagining of Africa. What I think is interesting, and I can't talk about, I don't know, is what lots of people in Africa were extremely excited about this movie. But I mean, it could have been the association with the glamour of Hollywood. But I also want to say that keep in mind who made the most money off of this movie is white people. So what Ryan Coogler needs to do is get his production
students, production company going and make movies that are, you know, along these sorts of lines. Now he knows that nobody can tell him, no, you can't, it won't make any money.
Right.
Now he needs to go on his own and make the movies that are going to bring in serious bang.
And I was going to say that the first major black directed film was by Melvin Van Peebles. So he went out, he took his own money, he raised the money and he funded it himself. So the Sweet House Badass Song is the name of the film, 1971. And he made a lot of money from it. And interestingly enough, it was supported by the Black Panther Party and many people in the black community. So I think we also have a template that why do we have to be dependent on Hollywood? I mean, why do we expect Hollywood to make films for us, for African people, If the African community could get together and pool their funds, I think this film about Haiti could be made. I think it's just who you go to and trying to mobilize. There's enough money even in the African American community alone. There's enough money to make that film.
It's really not that simple.
It's not that simple. I'm not saying nothing is, but I'm just saying where there is the will, there's the way. But the reality is we underestimate the collective power we have. For whatever reason, and this is maybe it's a conversation we can have beyond. We are not capitalizing on the potential collective power we have. Is it that we have a problem coming together and doing things collectively? Is that our fundamental, there are problems? Because I see other communities can come together and get stuff done.
I'm sorry.
But Michelle, you can address that. But all right, let's get a couple more people in
It's just one quick correction. It's really not that simple when it comes to cinema stuff. And the Melvin Van Peebles film was an independent film and it was not that economically successful. And stuff like this Fuku Sat by the Door and stuff, that stuff was banned. You couldn't get a copy of it until 2004 and stuff. And that's the wager is this. If Brian Coogler today says he wants to go and make that Haiti film and it's black people killing, let's see what happens. Until that happens, yeah, no, and it's really not that simple in terms of black people not being able to come together to raise money to make movies when it comes to the cinema industry, independent or not. It is not that simple at all. It may not even be able to be made. Yeah, exactly, too. It may not even be able to be made, but that's the next conversation. It's almost time to wrap up. Let's go to the person who had the next comment.
So good evening all, and congratulations for an excellent forum. I had to skip out because I had a tutorial. Turns out no one showed up, so I came back. I missed a few things, but I really want to speak to the role of women. Because I got a sense that there is some discontent that the role of women in the movie wasn't strong enough. Here's my view. Or put it being strong. I think the movie was realistic, right? And the role of women was authentic and strong, but you have to look beneath the surface. Yes? What do I mean to say? Well, I teach a course in macroeconomics. And one of the questions we ask is, what accounts for the difference in economic growth across space and time? And the answer is technological advancement. When we think of Africa, we don't say Father Africa, we say Mama Africa, yes? We think of the woman giving birth, the woman nurturing the children and so on. So for me, it was very important for the scientists to be female, to be creating things, to be innovative. And to me, that's where the true power lies in terms of the female in the movie, yeah? Apart from the obvious things about the strong warriors and so on, for me, the real strength came from the female scientist. Who, by the way, if you're into James Bond movies, it's like Q. You know Q, the white guy who makes all the gadgets for James Bond. On the surface, she was Q, right? Anyway, that's my one comment.